Hey everyone! So probably a year ago or longer than a year ago, I found this pretty neat jewelry box at the thrift store. It was only like $5 or something like that. But the reason why it was so cheap was because it was in need of a lot of love. Here it is. Pretty big. But as you can see, the wood vinyl or whatever they put on it has peeled off. But when you open it, this little drawer opens as well, and I think that's a pretty neat little feature. So it looks really rough in here, but it did have inserts, but they were pretty gross looking, so I just ripped them out. I didn't save them, so I guess you had to use your imagination as to what they looked like. This is one of the original things. I kept it because I want this little necklace rack thing. So I thought that I would get some sticky vinyl stuff to put over top of the existing stuff and remake the inserts for here, probably make little ring holders and stuff like that. I thought I would walk you guys through how I did this, so let's get started. I already took off as much of this wood vinyl stuff that I could. I originally planned to take all of it off, but I got to a certain point where the stuff just wouldn't come off anymore. I decided to just move on to recovering. I crossed my fingers and hoped that the vinyl was thick or textured enough to hide any areas where I couldn't get the old stuff off. But before I did that, I had to re-glue the bottom on. It was starting to come apart, so I applied wood glue to each side, making sure not to get any on the drawer, and then I put some heavy books on top overnight while the glue dried. Then it was time to add the new vinyl. I used this aged, cracked gold type of vinyl. I cut a piece that was big enough to cover the lid, making sure to give enough extra on the sides to go down and then wrap around to the inside. To help me place it correctly, I folded it along the edges. I started peeling the backing off one side, and then I used the crease to help align the piece again. I continued pulling the backing off, smoothing the vinyl down as I went. Then I pressed it down on the sides of the lid. On the back edge, I cut the corner bits like so. Then I cut the rest of the tabs off on these back corners. I opened the lid and repeated that process of cutting the corners and sticking the edges down. It was a little tricky by these metal parts, but I just stuck them down as best as I could. Then I went in and cut these corners at a diagonal. The handle on the box couldn't come off. It was riveted in place, so I thought I would just cut the vinyl around it. First, I cut straight down the middle on this edge of the lid. I thought I'd try sliding the vinyl under the handle, but that wasn't happening. The vinyl was too thick, so I decided to just tackle the other edges first. In this section where the metal arm things were, I used an X-Acto knife to trim the extra off. Then I pulled the rest around and stuck it down. I trimmed the extra tabs off the corners and then cut them diagonally like so. I pressed the vinyl down and got it as close to the handle as I could, and then I stuck it down to the inside. Then I used an X-Acto knife to carefully cut the extra vinyl around the handle. Thankfully, this method ended up working. You can barely even see the seam in the middle. Then I went to the back and cut off the extra vinyl, making sure to cut around the hinges. Unfortunately, the vinyl was just too short to try to cover more than one side at a time, so I went and cut two pieces that were as big as the sides, with a little bit extra on the bottom and sides to fold over, but with way more extra on the top to wrap around into the inside. Using the same method as the lid, I stuck one of the edge pieces down. I cut the corners like I did previously, and then I cut slits down to where the metal arms were. This made it so that I could push the vinyl through and stick it down on the inside. Then I went through and cut off any bits on the inside that might get in the way of the moving metal parts. Sorry my camera angles weren't the best for this part. I only realized this as I was editing, and obviously by then it's too late to do anything about it, so I apologize. At this point I remembered the rivets on the side of the box. I wanted them to show through, so I needed to cut them out. Just like the handle before, I just carefully cut around the rivets and then removed the vinyl. I repeated this on the other side, and then I covered the back. The back was simple enough. It was just a simple rectangle I stuck down and pulled around to the bottom. I didn't need to do anything special to it, so I didn't bother filming it. For the front, I needed 3 slivers of vinyl. One for the top bit, one for the drawer, and then a really thin one for the bottom. The bottom one probably could have been skipped, but the fake wood part did show a tiny bit when the drawer was closed, so I wanted to cover that up. I just did like before, cut a piece that fits, stick it down, cut the corners at a diagonal, and stick it down on the inside. There were also 3 more rivet things on the drawer that I cut out, and then it was time to reconstruct the inside. I kept the lid piece because it had a necklace rack that I wanted to reuse. Initially I was going to remove that and then cut a new piece of bookboard or something, but then I figured, why not just reuse this already existing piece? It's cut to the right size, so it'll fit, so why not? The rack was actually going all the way through the cardboard, so I had to remove it by cutting the plastic off at the back. For the inside I wanted to use this burgundy velvet. I thought that it would look really nice with the gold. So I cut some that was a little bit bigger than the cardboard, and then I put it down, wrong side up, and then placed the cardboard on top. I put a small line of hot glue on one edge and pressed it down. Then I put glue along the edge on the other side, and I pulled the fabric tight and then pressed it down. Then I repeated this on the edges of the unglued edges. I continued gluing the edges in small bits, pulling the fabric tight until I got to the corners. You can see that I started using the handle of the X-Acto knife to help press into the hot glue. Then I added glue to the corner bits and pressed them down. I flipped it over and glued the necklace rack in place. Even though originally the rack had the peg things that stuck through to the back, I thought that just gluing it down would be fine, but really I should have done more to adhere it because now it's only attached to the fabric, so if you pull at it or if you hang multiple necklaces on it, it sags down a bit. Anyway, I glued this whole thing into place on the inside of the lid. I went in and added some gold washi tape to the inside parts that would show even after adding the inserts. Then I cut the inserts for the rest of the inside. For this middle part, I needed to cut into the sides here about 1/4 of an inch in to make room so the metal arms can move around when you open and close it. Since there would be a hole on either side of this part, I wanted to wall them off. I also wanted to add 2 inner walls to this top part to break it into 3 sections. I cut some foam core board to size and glued them in place. I actually cut these side pieces too tall. When I test fit them, the top drawer couldn't go down as much as it needed to in order for it to close all the way, so I had to go back and trim them down quite a bit. Also, there was a small gap on either side of the front, so I cut 2 extra foam core pieces and stuck them to each side. For the top, I glued these pieces about 4 inches in on each side. Then I covered them with the same gold washi tape as the rest of the inside. I ended up cutting a small piece for the middle section of the top drawer thing, and I covered that and the bottom drawer with velvet in the same way I did with the lid piece. I glued the bottom piece in place and glued the whole top piece in place as well. To make the ring holder part, I cut pieces of felt that were as wide as the sections up top by a few inches. I rolled them up, gluing the ends down, and then put them in place. I didn't glue them into place yet because I wanted to know exactly how many I'd need, so I just repeated this until I filled up the section. I ran out of felt, so I had to do this other side with fleece fabric instead. I think I prefer the felt because it's a bit stiffer and it was easier to get the velvet in place and have it look nice and tight. So if I were to do this again, I definitely would only use felt. Anyway, once I knew how many pieces I'd need, I glued them down. Then I cut a piece of velvet that was 1 inch wider than the section and then probably like 2 feet long or something ridiculous like that. Since I was going to tuck the fabric down in between each felt piece, I wasn't exactly sure how much I'd need, and I figured I could just cut a big long piece, and if it was too much, I would use it for the other side. Then I started pushing the fabric down in place, making sure that there was enough extra on both sides. I was using my X-Acto knife at first, but then I came to my senses and realized the knife was probably cutting the fabric, so I ended up using this paintbrush that I had abused and is totally stiff because I let the paint dry in the bristles. So here you can see that the velvet is not showing up on camera that well. Hopefully you can still make out what I'm doing. I'll try to bump up the brightness so it actually shows up. Anyway, once you get to the other side, cut the excess off and tuck that end in. Then you can go and tuck the sides in. I didn't bother to glue any of this part down. I might regret it later, but I couldn't get the hot glue gun down into the crevices without messing up the velvet. I figured if it starts to come out, I'll just push it back in place since that's what I did in the first place anyway. I repeated this on the other side, and the ring holder section was done. And finally, I had to cover this weirdly shaped drawer. I cut another piece of cardboard that fit into the insert that I made. Then I covered it with velvet just like the other pieces, but taking care to pull it tight in the middle, around this middle part, so it didn't bunch up weirdly on these sides that I had to cut in. Well, I tried anyway. I glued that down and put the insert in place, and then I was done. I love how this turned out. The inside came out way better than I could have ever hoped. Well, except for the necklace rack part. And now I have the perfect place to put all of my jewelry. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, please leave a like. If you want to see more, then feel free to subscribe. I post art videos every Tuesday and DIY videos every Thursday. You can follow me on Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, Pinterest, or Snapchat, and I'll leave the information to those down below. Thank you to my patrons for helping me produce this video. If you're interested in becoming a patron or learning about what Patreon is, I'll leave a link up here and you can go check it out. If you have any questions or suggestions for future videos, please leave a comment down below, and I'll see you next week.